Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a system that is fundamentally, structurally broken. Every single day on this show, we talk about holding the line. We talk about the defending of the rule of law, backing our law enforcement officers, and ensuring that our neighborhoods are safe for our children, our families, and our elderly. But what happens when the very institutions tasked with upholding that line decide to erase it entirely? Today, we are dissecting the anatomy of a broken system. We're going to look at a case out of San Francisco that has shocked the conscience of the nation. The sentencing of Antoine Watson, the man who violently took the life of 84-year-old Vicha Ratton-Pakadi. We are going to look at how a brutal, fatal assault caught on clear video somehow resulted in 0 prison time, leaving a killer to walk out of a courtroom on probation. But we aren't just looking at one verdict. We are going to expose the track record of the activist benchwarmers who make these decisions, specifically Judge Linda Colfax, and how this radical legal ideology has inverted our justice system, turning perpetrators into victims and leaving law-abiding citizens to pay the price. And finally, we're going to ask the hard question that no one else in the media wants to touch. Why are these judges completely untouchable? We are going to look at the infuriating doctrine of absolute judicial immunity and why it is time to dismantle that shield so that activists in black robes can finally be held personally liable for the wreckage they unleash on our streets. This is an explicit look at the justice gap in America. It's raw, it's frustrating, and it's a conversation that absolutely has to happen right now. Buckle up, we're diving into the deep end next. From Seattle to Los Angeles, this is Left Coast News. No apologies, just the truth. Let's get right into the heart of this matter. If you want to understand exactly why everyday citizens are losing faith in our courts, look no further than the San Francisco Superior Court. We have all seen the video from 2021. An 84-year-old grandfather, Vicha Ratton-Pakadi, is simply walking down the street when a man charges across the road and violently slams him to the concrete. It was unprovoked, it was brutal, and it ultimately cost that innocent man his life. The trial finally happens. The defendant, Antoine Watson, is convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Now, under any reasonable definition of public safety, a violent assault that results in the death of an elderly citizen demands real accountability. But what did San Francisco Superior Court Judge Linda Colfax do? She handed down an 8-year sentence, but then she immediately granted Watson 5 years of pretrial credit for time served. And the remaining 3 years, suspended, erased, replaced with formal probation and mandatory mental health treatment. Watson walked out of custody a free man. 0 additional prison time for a fatal attack. How does a judge justify this? The defense stood up in court and argued that the defendant was experiencing a perfect storm of emotional distress, childhood trauma, and PTSD, citing a past car crash and a police encounter to completely negate malice aforethought, and the judge bought it. She prioritized psychological narrative of the perpetrator over the absolute destruction of an innocent life. This isn't an isolated mistake, folks. This is a feature of the justice system, not a bug. Judge Colfax spent 13 years as a public defender before donning the black robe. And her judicial philosophy has consistently prioritized rehabilitation over incarceration, even when public safety is compromised. Remember the Garrett Doty case? She's the same judge who stripped away aggravating factors and released a man accused of a violent assault before trial. When the system spends more time psychoanalyzing the criminal than protecting the community, the social contract is dead. The systematic revolving door. Now, the apologists for the system will tell you, oh, the judge's hands were tied by systematic backlogs. Let's talk about those backlogs. One of the biggest games played in the courts today involves the Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial. The defense intentionally waives that right over and over again. Why? Because it creates a massive backlog, strains prosecutor schedules, and allows the defendant to sit in local jail, racking up time served credits. By the time the case actually finishes, the defense uses those credits to wipe out the entire sentence. It is calculated strategy to exploit the system, and the judges allow it. And why do they get away with it? Because of a total lack of accountability. In places like San Francisco, incumbent judges rarely face competitive election cycles. They sit in their ivory towers, safe from political consequences, completely insulated from the reality of the streets they are destabilizing. We are seeing a massive voter led pushback across California. Look at the passage of Proposition 36, which is a direct cry for help from citizens demanding stricter penalties for repeat offenders. The public is desperate for common sense, but as long as progressive activists dominate the bench, statutory reforms won't matter because judges will always find a loophole to let violent offenders back out. Which brings us to the biggest roadblock of all: cracking the shield of immunity. Whenever we pull back the curtain on activist judges who treat violent criminals like real victims, I get the exact same question flooding the inbox. Every single time, regular law abiding citizens ask me, can we sue them? Can the victims sue the judges for the catastrophic destruction their rulings unleash on our communities? And folks, here is the cold, hard, infuriating truth. Under the current American legal system, you can't touch them. There is a legal doctrine called absolute judicial immunity. It means a judge can look at an undeniable video of a fatal assault, manipulate the rules to hand down probation, watch the criminal walk out of the front door to terrorize someone else, and you cannot sue that judge for a single dime in civil damages. They are completely insulated from personal financial ruin, protected by a system that claims judges need fearless decision making to do their jobs. But let's talk about reality. When fearless decision making transforms into reckless, unaccountable activism, the law isn't a shield anymore, it's a license to endanger the public. It is time to completely flip the script on judicial immunity. It is time for a radical change in the law. If a doctor commits gross malpractice, they get sued. If a corporation acts with reckless disregard for human life, they get dragged into court and held liable. So, why on earth do we allow an activist in a black robe to commit judicial malpractice with absolute impunity? We need to pass state and federal legislation that carves out a massive public safety exception to judicial immunity. If a judge deliberately ignores mandatory sentencing guidelines or downgrades violent offenses to shield a criminal from state prison, that judge should be held personally, civilly liable for the consequences for that release. Think about how fast that would stop this nonsense if Judge Colfax or any other activist benchwarmer knew that their own personal bank accounts, their own assets, and their own estates were on the line the next time they decided to validate an emotional storm instead of protecting the public. The moment a judge faces the very real threat of a massive lawsuit from a victim's family, the ivory tower theories about rehabilitative philosophy will vanish. Real personal liability would inject an immediate dose of common sense back into our courtrooms. It would force these judges to think about the law abiding citizens who have to live in the real world instead of focusing entirely on the feelings of the person who broke the law. Until we strip away this absolute immunity and hold judges accountable for the wreckage they cause, the revolving door will keep spinning. It's time to make them pay for the damage they do. Do you think it's time to end absolute judicial immunity? As we close out tonight, I want to bring this back to the one group that our justice system seems increasingly determined to forget: the innocent. The 84-year-old man walking down the street, the woman begging the courts to take a stalker seriously, the store clerk staring down the same career criminal for the fifth time, the police officer arresting someone he already arrested 3 weeks ago, and the family sitting in a courtroom looking at an empty chair where their loved ones should be, only to hear excuse after excuse about the person who put them there. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of watching politicians, prosecutors, judges, And academics conduct social experiments with other people's lives while they remain insulated from the consequences. I'm tired of hearing about trauma only when we're talking about the offender. What about the trauma of the victim? What about the family that will never be whole again? What about the neighborhood that becomes afraid to walk outside? What about the cops who risk their lives catching violent criminals only to watch the courthouse revolving door spit them right back onto the street? At some point, a civilized society has to be willing to say something very simple. Your circumstances may explain your actions, they do not excuse them. Justice can have mercy. Justice can recognize rehabilitation, but justice without accountability isn't justice at all. And public safety is not some secondary consideration to be weighed after every possible concern of the offender has been satisfied. Protecting innocent people is one of the most fundamental responsibilities of government. Our constitutional system created an independent judiciary for a reason. Judges should not be political puppets, and they should not fear personal retaliation every time they make an unpopular decision. But judicial independence was never supposed to mean judicial supremacy, and it certainly wasn't supposed to mean freedom from every form of meaningful accountability. A black robe is not a crown. Judges do not get to substitute personal ideology for the law simply because they believe their philosophy is more enlightened than the will of the people and the statutes enacted by their elected representatives. And when the same philosophy repeatedly produces the same result, violent offenders receiving extraordinary leniency, while victims and communities absorb the consequences, we have every right to demand answers. We have every right to examine judicial records. We have every right to demand stronger oversight. We have every right to reform laws that have become shields for misconduct. And most importantly, we have every right to vote judges and the politicians who enable these policies out of office wherever the law gives us that power. Because this isn't left versus right when an 84-year-old man is dead. This isn't an academic debate when someone is beaten in the street. This isn't compassion when the cost of your compassion is paid by an innocent person who never volunteered to participate in your experiment. You want to reform prisons? Fine, reform them. You want better mental health treatment? Build it. You want rehabilitation programs that actually reduce recidivism? I'll listen to the evidence. But none of that requires us to abandon accountability. None of it requires us to pretend violent criminals aren't violent. And none of it requires ordinary Americans to accept becoming collateral damage in somebody else's ideological crusade. The first duty of a justice system is supposed to be justice. And the first obligation of government is to protect the rights of the innocent, not continually sacrifice those rights on the altar of sympathy for the guilty. So remember these cases. Remember the victims. Remember the names of the judges. Read their records. Pay attention to who appoints them, who endorses them, and who keeps defending a system that produces outcomes like this. Because if the people responsible for administering justice refuse to protect the public, then the public must use every lawful and constitutional tool available to hold the system accountable. The ballot box, judicial elections and recalls where available, legislative reform, public oversight, and relentless public scrutiny. No threats, no vigilantism, no mob justice. Accountability under the law. That's what separates a constitutional republic from the chaos these policies are creating. We don't need fewer consequences for violent criminals. We don't need another lecture about why the person who committed the crime is the real victim. And we sure as hell don't need another grieving family being told that the person who destroyed their lives deserves more consideration than they do. We need judges who understand that compassion for criminals cannot come at the expense of innocent lives. We need a justice system that remembers who it exists to protect. And we need the courage to say that when the system repeatedly chooses offenders over victims, the system itself must change. Vicha Ratan Pakadi, deserved better. His family deserved better. San Francisco deserves better. And every American deserves to live in a community where the justice system values their life more than it values the latest fashionable excuse for the person who takes it. That's where I stand. Protect the innocent, support the rule of law, hold violent offenders accountable, and hold every public official entrusted with that responsibility accountable as well. Because public safety isn't radical, it's the bare minimum. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person we built this channel for. Left Coast News exists to cut through the noise and bring you straightforward analysis of the stories shaping Washington, the Pacific Northwest, and beyond. If you found this video valuable, please subscribe and follow us wherever you get your content, including YouTube, Rumble, Brighteon, BitChute, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you'd like to help support independent journalism, you can also join us on Patreon. Patreon is free for now. You'll find the link in the description below. And if you think this story matters, share it with your friends and family. That's one of the biggest ways you can help this channel grow. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you agree with this analysis, or do you see it differently? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching Left Coast News.